Welcome to the Work Podcast, brought to you by Open Assembly. I'm John Windsor, and today I'm with Rishad Tobaccowala. Rishad was the Chief Growth Officer at Publicis Group. He now works closely with company leaders to increase productivity by unleashing the potential of their talent. He has been named a top marketing and business leader by Businessweek and Time Magazine, and he regularly presents keynote speeches at well-known global organizations such as Kellogg's, IBM, Amazon, Google, and Facebook. Rishad is also the author of Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. How are you doing today, Rishad?
Excellent, John. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for being here. Rishad and I go way back in the ad industry. I mean, this must be 15 years or so. And you've always been an inspiration to me. Not only your thinking, but just the way you've built things. So, but let's just get the audience up to date with what you've been doing. Could you just give us a little bit of your background?
Sure. Very quickly grew up in India, got a degree in mathematics, got an MBA, came to Chicago where I got my MBA, joined Leo Burnett, the advertising agency, and spent a 38-year career in the very same place. Though the last time my business card said Leo Burnett was 1995. I helped launch some of the first interactive agencies. One of them was called Giant Step. Helped launch a media company called Starcom. Then we merged with another company. Then we eventually got bought by a French company in 2002 called Publicis Group. Was involved in purchasing big agencies like Digitas and Razorfish and Sapient. And the last 5 years at Publicis, I was the chief strategist as well as the chief growth officer. I continue to be connected to Publicis as a senior advisor. In fact, this is the week where I spend 2 hours every morning for 5 days. One of the things I do is I oversee, or rather MC, all their executive training, among the various other things that I look at. But basically, I had made a commitment to myself and to my wife and got the company to agree that I would stop working full-time there when I was 58. It didn't work out that way because they needed me to stay a couple of more years, so it was 60. And I'm now a company of one. I'm an author of the book, as you mentioned. I also write a free thought letter. I speak, and then I advise people, in addition to Publicis, a variety of different companies. And very active, but what I think I've managed to do is keep the best parts of working, which is working with people, helping build things, create things, speak, think, write. And I managed to avoid or minimize the stuff that's less fun, which is managing P&Ls, bosses, clients, and talent.
I love it, man. That's so great. I'm envious of that for sure. Hey, let's jump into the book a little bit. Describe the book to us. And, obviously we talked a little bit about it in the introduction, but I'd love to get just a little bit deeper into it and have you tell the audience what it's all about.
So, very simply, the book, which is called Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data, is written to help people think, see, and feel differently about how to grow their company or their business, their teams, or themselves. So if you're an individual and you're not in any team or a company, it's worthwhile. If you're in a business, it's worthwhile. And it addresses 4 broad issues. The first one is how to think about the future. Another one is how to manage change so it sucks less. A third is how to lead well and how to lead with soul and how to lead the next generation of talent. And the last is how to continuously remain relevant by upgrading your mental operating system. So it's really about future and change and leadership and remaining relevant and growing as a person. It's written unusually in that you can read any chapter in any order. It's like a Spotify playlist, but it's not a book of essays because there's actually a connecting spine. And the connecting spine, besides the spine of the book, if you buy it in hardcover form, is a concept called the story and the spreadsheet. That successful individuals, businesses, and teams combine the spreadsheet, which is data, facts, P&L, with a story, which is culture, people, talent. And most companies that succeed combine them, sometimes in a 70-30 mix, sometimes in a 30-70 mix. But when companies tilt too much towards the spreadsheet, you end up with companies like Wells Fargo that opens up fake accounts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or United Airlines that has gone into bankruptcy 3 times. When companies go too much to the right, which is all story, little spreadsheet, you end up with WeWork, under the first regime, which is all marijuana, so it's all smoke, no hat, right? But companies that combine them, and you can see that industry after industry. So let's compare a Southwest versus a United. Let's compare a Costco versus a Walmart prior to the new CEO, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
compare a Microsoft before and after Satya Nadella. And you will see that regardless of the industry, regardless of the size, successful companies combine the two. And sometimes, because we're living in this age of data and technology and measurement, people have become so data obsessed that they've lost the plot.
Mm-hmm. I love that, man. What a great combination. What a great paradigm to think about the future and the future of work, for sure. Well, I'm sure you're doing so many interesting things right now, but what's the most interesting thing you are doing right now?
I think the single most important, interesting thing that I'm doing is being able to enhance the productivity of anybody I speak to by 5% in 1 hour or less.
Wow, that's a huge goal, man.
Yeah.
I love that.
So
how do you do that? Tell us the secrets.
So it's very, very simple. The first is I try to give a perspective of the 3 things that most people should be focusing on, which is globalization, which is unstoppable, demographic shifts, and depending on which country I'm talking to, there are different demographic shifts. In the United States, the demographic shifts are multi-ethnicity. Under 21 has already become a multi-ethnic country. For the first time, it's an aging country. 10,000 people turn 65 every day. And those people, by the way, who are over 60 control more than 60% of America's wealth. And the third is the divide between rural and urban areas, as well as the divide between the coasts and the rest of the country. So what are the implications of that for a person's career, for their company, etc.? I should just focus on those 3. I've added a 3.5 because of COVID-19, and I talk about this in a piece I've written, which hopefully you can link to, called The Great Reinvention, which is, this is not just the great acceleration and the great disruption, but this is the first time we have something that has impacted everybody in the world, regardless of title, across every industry. It is an economic and a health and a social crisis at the same time. And it's gone on for 12 to 18 to 24 months, which basically means people's behaviors have changed, society has changed. And so we are looking at the great reinvention. So those are the trends I look for people to focus on. And I say, just focus on that. Don't waste your time doing a whole bunch of other things. Just focus on these 3.5. So, or maybe 4. So that's what that is. The second thing is I talk to them about how change sucks. That anybody who comes to you and tells you that change is good is lying. Okay? Because if change is so good, like a bottle of wine, they should share it with you. But they never do that. They tell you change is good and they walk away. If someone comes to me and says change is good, I say, I'm happy. If you want to change, go ahead. Why are you telling me to change if it's so good? You do it. Right? And as someone who basically has worked in the same company for 38 years, lived in Chicago for 40, met my wife when we were 12 at 48, I hate change. But while change sucks, because when you change, you don't know what you're doing, you make a fool of yourself, and you go up a learning curve. And it does suck. But while it sucks, irrelevance is even worse.
Yep.
So I explain to people how to actually navigate from how to manage change so it sucks less, so you become less irrelevant. And what some of those things are. The third area really is about leadership. And especially as a new generation arises, my basic belief is that talent does not work for companies or for institutions. Institutions and companies work for talent. That we are in a world, all over the world, where there are unfortunately 2 groups of talent. One group of talent for which the supply outstrips demand. Mm-hmm. And that might be a warehouse worker, it might be an Uber driver. And another group where demand outstrips supply. And that might be a nurse, It might be a truck driver. It may be someone who writes code, right? It could be a great strategist.
Mm-hmm.
So for that half of the business, which is what most of us deal with most of the time, there is more talent and or there's less talent, but more capital in demand. But most companies actually believe that there is little capital and lots of talent. And I'm trying to explain to people there's lots of capital, little talent, right? And how you lead and manage becomes extremely important. And I identify 5 key characteristics of great leaders and how to actually implement them, just 5,
Wow.
right? And then I end by basically talking about how each of us can improve and what are the 3 key tricks that you can do tomorrow to significantly improve. So this cluster, right, that anybody actually implements has improved. Even the most harshest CFO who basically read my book or has spoken with me and says, I don't believe this. So I said, okay, give me an hour. And I don't even need you to talk to me. I'm going to send you 5 pieces to read. Read those, and then let's talk afterwards. And if you don't think you're 5% more productive, your money back. Obviously, I sent to them free, so their money back is nothing either. But it says, here it is. And they come back and they say, I'm buying my book your book for my entire company. Because I just figured out that my average employee costs $50,000. If they become 5% more productive, it's $2,500. Your book costs $20,000. I get a 100-to-1 ratio. So that's what I find most interesting, not just the book. That my whole stuff is, why can't I take you from one place to another place?
Yeah.
Right? Within an hour or 2. Why are we spending days and years and months?
Oh, I know.
So that's what I'm finding.
That's really cool,
exciting.
Man. Yeah, I love it. I mean, one of the reasons I called, it's after all this time, because it's been a while since we've connected, was certainly the article on the Great Reinvention. It definitely was just not just an awesome article, but it definitely helped me change my perspective. As I've been in the space for a while, but I'd love for you to talk through that and kind of what are you seeing in the context of this latest disruption and also with the work you did with the Great Reinvention.
So I would basically break this up into 3 parts. So the first is I started thinking about it, and the Great Reinvention was written as 4 separate pieces in April and May of 2020. Mm-hmm. I just wrote 4 different pieces. And then I was asked by my old place of work, Publicis, to speak to 400 clients worldwide about what my thoughts were on this. So I put all these 4 together in a conversation. I don't present, as you know, I just had a conversation. But everybody wanted a leave behind. So I sent these 4 pieces of writing to a designer. And I said, can you design something that smart people or people would appreciate, at least the design of it, besides the substance? And that was the Great Reinvention. And in there, the 4 points I make is the first one, which I've talked about, is how this is bigger and different than anything, and things are going to change in people's habits. Right. But then I define and I run it on a 3x3 sort of grid. Mm-hmm. So my belief is there are 3 phases we're going through: a phase of fragility, mm-hmm. a phase of resilience, and a phase of resurrection. So fragility is always there, but we're a little less fragile now when we're more in the resilience phase, mm-hmm. right, as we're entering the resurrection phase. So fragility is because we were anxious about our health. We were fearful about our jobs, right? We were uncertain about the future. So that was fragility. Resilience is, okay, we have to get over it. So what do we do? And how do we save money? What do we do? How do we change our habits? And then resurrection is, how do we start with a fresh sheet of paper? So those are the 3 phases. But the thing that people appreciated, right, and which if I have a sort of superpower, is to basically look at things more broadly than most people do. Mm-hmm. So what people appreciated was I did not then look at these things of fragility, resilience, and resurrection only from the perspective of business, but from the perspective of society, mm-hmm. and from the perspective of individuals. Mm-hmm. So for each of those, I basically said, here is what people are going to be looking for, here's what business is going to be looking for, and here's what society is going to be looking for. And that intertwining, that we were all connected, that we couldn't just like disconnect, right? And there was this interconnection made the very big difference. Since then, I've written more on these topics, and the three that I think are most relevant for your audience is one about the future of work. And I've thought more about the future of work, and I basically believe that we are all gig workers. That we're now in a world where we are all gig workers, we just don't know it yet. That doesn't mean your gig can't be a long gig, maybe 15 years, and that you won't get benefits and you'll get paid. But if you think about people who work in Hollywood or in McKinsey or Bain, they're gig workers, right? So, but if once you focus on that, and the reason for that is because of COVID, that we all work from home, but also because companies are starting to figure out how to manage their most expensive variable cost, which is employees. So how do they dial it up and how do they dial it down? And how do they access people from all over the world? Now, I'm lucky. I'm one of a few lucky people. Some of us are lucky. Not everyone is lucky. That what I can do from home, right? And as a result of this tragedy, my personal business is stronger today than it's ever been, because I can basically cover clients on the same day on 4 continents. It would never have been possible and not acceptable before COVID, right? But
yeah, for sure,
we can do this. But now those same clients basically say, I can get a clown like Rishad, even if he's in Chicago, and I only need to pay him a little bit because I only need a little bit of his time, right? So I'm getting who I think is really good for a low variable cost. In my case, I'm having a global audience and I get paid very highly for that 1 hour. So instead of now selling cows, no one is buying cows anymore. They're buying basically slices or little ounces of Kobe beef. So as a gig worker, you got to think about what's your Kobe beef, right? And you're not like a hunk of meat that you're trying to sell. So one is about the future of work on that and what people need to do. A second one is what I call the year of immunity, which is this particular year. We see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're only 60% through the tunnel. That before things get back to quote unquote, I don't even call it the new normal, as you know, I call it the new strange. But before things get back, let's say in the United States, it's going to be Labor Day, right? And even during Labor Day, after Labor Day, we are likely to basically wear masks and have social distancing and stuff like that. So the good news is there's the light at the end of the tunnel. The bad news is this has already been going on for 12 months, and it's going to go on for another 6 months. So there's a lot of pressure on people, especially, I think, mothers with kids at home, right? But there are a lot of these other pressures. So what are some of the implications, but also what people have not thought about? And that piece was also very popular, the year of immunity, because of a little thing I wrote in between there, which is that the office is never coming back, right? Which on paper may seem controversial, but actually when you see the logic of it, the office makes no sense.
I love the unbundling idea.
It's the unbundling. So work has been unbundled to 4 places: home, office, experiences, right? And an office somewhere near your home, like a WeWork or other places. And depending on the industry, your job, your company, your portfolio will be different. Yes, there will be companies. If you work at a dentist's office, you have to be at the dentist's office. You can't do remote, for at least a while, you can't do remote stuff. But if you happen to be in our types of business, which is strategy or marketing, you could basically only have to be at the office 10% of your time. You could meet your clients at either events, or you could meet your colleagues at these WeWork-like things. So you could combine them in different ways. And this whole idea of not thinking about going back, but about reinventing is a big part of it. So that's been also very, very popular.
That's awesome. I love that. And it's very in line with a lot of the work we're doing at Harvard. Certainly you can see that, in some of the research we've done on NASA, we know that, we looked at in the lab, we looked at 350 projects over a 5-year period and compared the open talent projects with the closed talent projects and realized that they're, as good or better results, 4 to 5 times faster, 8 to 10 times cheaper. Yeah. So it's really difficult. I think the difficult thing though is how do you implement such a radical policy in a corporate culture that's not ready for it? Let's start talking about open talent for a second. Where do you see it fitting in the ecosystem of talent for most companies? I mean, my sense is that all the research that I've been doing and writing is that, it's the, as you know, when, I sold VNS to Havas, right? It was
Right.
like, it was this new shiny thing that David and I were working on, David Jones and I, and trying to get it implemented into, Havas, which is a, great, but an old French company. It wasn't the leaders that had the problem. It was the 350 local CEOs that really struggled with the kind of change you talked about, right? And the ideas that we were trying to implement. But I would love to hear from you kind of where you see it fitting into the talent ecosystem today.
So I believe it's going to be central. And why it's become central is you and David were ahead of your time, right? What you need is not only the right idea, but you need three other things for the idea to scale. You need the right time, right? You need the right cultural supporting material in the culture, and you need the right crises. And COVID-19 is that, right?
I agree.
And it is something else. You came up with that idea before there was really broad-based cloud computing and things like Zoom.
For sure.
Okay. Yeah. And as a result, it was hard. So the cultural context wasn't there. The technology context wasn't there. COVID was basically obviously the crisis that made that happen. And then what happens is everybody now sort of is asking, why were we doing it that way? I used to fly, I'm sure you did a lot when you were working. I used to fly 140 flight segments a year.
Wow.
Okay, 140. I haven't flown since Feb 18th of last year. I've been to the airport 4 times to pick up and drop our daughters who live in New York, and they come here for extended periods of time. But besides that, I haven't been inside an airport. I mean, we drive up and pick them up. And my whole thing is, do I want to travel? Yes. To meet friends and on vacation.
Right.
Do I want to go back and sit in some building in an office to have an office and spend like 15 hours and eat, stale hamburgers? No way. Yeah. So what's basically happened is that means that open work is a big deal. I think what tends to basically happen is now we're no longer talking about does open, open workplaces, freelance, open, we aren't talking about that. We're now basically saying, assuming that now that is the default state,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
How do we basically create relationships, cultures, and training?
Yep. No, I totally agree. I think that's where we are. Well, so when you look ahead, what is the future of open talent? How do you see it rolling out? Obviously, it's happening. It's super robust. I don't know if you saw this week that LinkedIn Marketplace, relaunched, yep. Or they launched a new effort, and now I don't know if you saw that the guys, a few guys from Airbnb launched a SPAC today. Raised a bunch of money, and so there's a robustness. But in the incumbent world, it's still, the adoption is still slow.
But it's increasingly happening, and I'll tell you, there are 3 or 4 places. And I recently have had a comment. Obviously, we've seen, Microsoft entering via LinkedIn because they see the big business that Upwork and Fiverr and all these places have, which is number one. Number two, a company that started 3 years ago, long after you, had no longer at VNS, etc. And I just interviewed for a podcast that I host, which one day hopefully I'll get you on, called What Next, for Publicists. So I interviewed Stephanie Natty Olson of We Are Rosie, and We Are Rosie is basically victors and spoiled a decade later with probably smarter people than you and me.
For sure,
the best way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And she has 7,000, right, people, so open talent accessing the platform. And at any given stage, she has 400 of them, right, having an assignment. Her revenue was up 100% from a pretty large base in 2020. Mm-hmm. She supports direct clients and she supports all of the holding companies, right? And she offers new kinds of things for open talent, which are 3 very important things besides the access to opportunities. She basically provides them with healthcare. Mm-hmm. She basically doesn't call them freelance talent. She basically, calls them empowered workers, right? And she ensures that they get paid weekly, regardless of how her company gets paid.
That's great.
Right? So that they make a cash flow. And so these are, I think, a big part of open talent is what are the underlying subsystems that actually let someone leverage their talent? Because there are these little things that we forget, which is you can't have lumpy payments when you basically have constant bills,
Right.
things like that.
Yeah. No, there's so much more work to do on it. And Stephanie's done a great job. We are Rosie. And I think it's really interesting and robust in the marketplace, right? It's like 99 Designs just getting acquired by Vistaprint. But one of the things I think that's interesting as a trend in the space is that all of a sudden we're seeing talent being embedded in software. So I find intriguing the 99 Design Squarespace, relationship where 99 Designs is embedded into Squarespace. So when you as an entrepreneur or a person goes in and says, I'm ready to design a website or I'm ready to build my website, you can push, ask an expert and recruit, talent from the 99 Design talent to do that. So just embedded really easy right into the software.
And I will tell you that I've become such a fan of open talent ever since not just COVID, but my own example, because I am now a gig worker with a company of one. I'm by myself, right? And I sort of marry what I call carbon, which is me, with silicon, which is technology, to create value, right? So I create those. And that is including the fact that by myself, I've scaled to reaching 20,000 people every week using Substack. So I use silicon, I use Substack technology. I don't do the payment part of it, but I do the email and the content management part of it, right? To basically build a direct relationship with 6,300 subscribers or 20,000 readers in 6 months. And that is what I'm also trying to explain to people at the board, right? Hey, listen, I am individually without much skill at 61 years old, right? And without, by the way, mine is more the zeal of passion and enjoyment. I don't have a Bunsen burner under my butt to pay a bill. Mm-hmm. But imagine if I had that, I would even think harder and faster than I normally think, right? And by the way, I can scale circles around your entire organization.
For sure.
Right? I can build teams if I wanted to faster with better product by the time you all decide your board meeting has ended.
Right.
And it's not me. If I can do it at this stage, it means that millions of talented people who you can unleash.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always tell the stories back when I was in the publishing business. I had this crazy idea when I owned Women's Sports and Fitness to put the company with 120 employees online. And so I did this, I decided to, stretch Ethernet cable throughout the office. And it cost me $100,000 to do that, to put people online on dial-up. And so here we are today, that essentially that whole cost and all the people I had to keep on staff to keep that thing running is just gone to zero. And of course, you don't need as a number of people to do the kind of work you need to do. But yet, one of the things I find interesting is that, when we've gone from, if we look back and you go from the agricultural age to the industrial age, certainly for a long time, people were doing industrial age things, yet running organizations with kind of agricultural age technologies or organizational structures. I think that's one of the biggest structures, one of the biggest issues now, right? There's so many companies that are working in digital age like we all are, like you made a great example of yourself, yet their organizational structures are still based in the industrial age, right? They still run as if they're building things in the industrial age. The advertising business is a great example, still categorizing people and cutting people up, the way that they've done historically. And certainly a lot of advances have happened, but I think that's the issue, is how do you get the business model and the organizational structure into the future so that it matches the kind of work you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that is a real issue. And, my newsletter and also in my book, I have this line, which is the future does not fit in the containers of the past. Mm-hmm. And what we have is organization systems, leadership systems, incentive systems built on optimizing yesterday. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. With management in many companies who were trained the day before yesterday.
Right, for sure. For sure.
Right? And so a lot of people, say, we have a junior board we occasionally speak to. I say, why don't you make your junior board part of your board? Mm-hmm. Right? They may have more thinking and better thinking than you do. And more importantly, when you have intergenerational conversations, people can learn from each other, right? We who are older have a certain, not just wisdom, but we have certain skill sets that maybe they don't appreciate. Mm-hmm. They who are younger, right, It may be some other thoughts. It may not just be their digital skills, but the ability to think with a fresh sheet of paper that we may learn from.
No, I love that. That's awesome. So what's on your roadmap? What are you thinking about, and what's the future hold?
So, I think there are three big things for me. The first one, which I do not control, and hopefully that will stay, which is, I'm hoping that I remain healthy and people around me remain healthy, not just post-COVID, but, as one gets older, as you know, one has issues, but so far I'm fine. So assuming that I'll do everything from wearing seat belts to exercising and sleeping well to maximize that thing. That's one part of the future. Because if you aren't going to be alive tomorrow, it's no use planning. So that's one part of it. The second one, to a great extent, is I'm in a position where I both get great joy from, as well as I think I can help people get better. So a lot of what I'm basically doing is, how do I use all my experience to help people for them to grow? So my thought is, how do I scale through people? Right? But in a very different way, which is not scale through people like some people have to click on stuff that I do, everything else. So it's very much like my newsletter, where I basically spend 3 hours every week writing it. It takes someone 5 to 6 minutes to read it, though people say sometimes they think about it for longer than those 5 to 6 minutes, right? But in effect, I have great joy in doing it because I like reading and writing and thinking, and this is a way to do it. They find it fun because it's interesting and well written, usually for 5 to 6 minutes. But they then use some of that, and it's no cost. It's their cost, obviously, is the 6 minutes that they spend. And then I scale through people. But it's what ideas they think can fit them, and if it makes sense to them, they use it. And so a big part of my stuff is, how do I scale through people? And in doing so, it's an amazing win, because the people win, and assuming that these ideas are good, people who use them, the networks around them win, and I build a brand and reputation, and people don't think I'm silly. So I win too.
That's awesome, Rishad. Nobody's ever thought you're silly, man. You've always been at the forefront of all this stuff, for sure. Hey, so if you had a crystal ball, what would the world look like 5 years, 10 years from now?
So, like you, I've thought a lot about the future, and like you, I've always basically believed that anybody who thinks in the future has to be humble, because we are likely to get it wrong, some things.
Very much.
But some of us have got it more right than wrong. So let's assume that these predictions are more right than wrong. So one is, I believe we're going to see a world which is increasingly driven by this unusual combination of science and storytelling. That increasingly the countries that are going to get more and more powerful are countries that believe in science. And if you decide not to believe in gravity, you can jump out of the window. Gravity doesn't care. You're dead. Thank you very much. Okay. So this whole idea of being anti-science and not understanding science or refusing science doesn't matter. And one of the reasons you're seeing the rise of Asia is there's a great emphasis on education and science and knowledge, right? And it doesn't have to be science in like physics and chemistry, but it could be the science of botany or the science of economics. But science, that it has to be data-driven, realistic, pragmatic, checked, etc., versus imagination. But human beings, right, don't live by facts alone. We also live by imagination and inspiration and storytelling. So the other is the ability to tell stories and connect with people through modern and ancient technology. Ancient technology might be basically what is being in a renaissance. The first way people told stories was gathering around a fire, right? Not very different than Clubhouse.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. People basically listened to stories, right? We used to call it radio, and today it is podcasts.
Yeah.
Right. So in effect, but there'll be modern ways. And to me, the most important thing is mongrel media, which is, when you actually think about TikTok, and I had a chance to talk with TikTok, it's one of the first streaming media which doesn't operate without sound. You could basically look at your Instagram feed. You could basically look at a lot of feeds without sound. You can't do that on TikTok. right? It's the first streaming really true multimedia. If you think about it, the sort of vertical stream.
Great thought.
YouTube is a little bit different. And you have all these mongrel media where if you think about in China, what is WeChat? Is it a messaging? Is it e-commerce? Is it social media? So the other is all these things that we've created in containers. This is the e-commerce practice, and this is the social media practice, and this happens to be the messaging practice. Well, which practice is in charge of WeChat or what WhatsApp might become, right? And that is what I also find extremely fascinating, and that is new ways of connecting and telling stories combined with science.
Yeah, that's super cool. So, any interesting stories on organizations that figured this out and live in the future?
Yes, so I'm going to give you 3 or 4 organizations that are adapting very well to the future, and by their very nature, I'm going to give the 3 of them, which are kind of obvious and non-obvious. So the closest I'm going to get to technology is Microsoft. Okay, so Microsoft for 10 years under Steve Ballmer went nowhere. In 5 years with Satya Nadella, right, outside of its stock price that has gone up by 500%, it's basically become a company that has done the following things. It has gone from a closed mindset to an open mindset, from looking at the world through the cells of a window, to basically looking down from a cloud called Azure, right? It's gone from stack ranking, where the bottom 10% were kicked out of the company, to everybody being asked to read Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck, which is the Learn It All mindset, and on collaboration and no stack ranking. From a company that basically truly believes in diversity and as part of Black Lives Matter, basically had addressable things, which is in 3 years, they're going to do these many percent of their board, these many percent of their leadership. They basically have put those appraisals and bonuses into their incentive system and are using their buying power with their suppliers. So it's a company that has reinvented itself, a huge company, right? By combining this whole idea of technology and storytelling, understanding culture and modern ESG. The same thing has happened with Walmart before and after Doug McMillon. So when people tell me companies cannot change, I say if Walmart and Microsoft can, don't tell me you can't. Okay, and these are like huge corporations.
Yeah.
Less sexy, but also some company that has figured it out. And in ways that are so prescient that we haven't actually thought about it is Domino's Pizza. Okay, so Domino's Pizza, basically, if you had invested in Domino's Pizza, you would do better than any FANG stock excepting Netflix.
Yep.
10 years ago, right? And they basically thought about owning the whole pizza category, also understanding they were in the logistics of the pizza business. But also today, they own their own delivery system. So they don't lose the 20, 50, 30% to Grubhub and Uber Eats.
Yep.
Right? And so there are all these companies that people are thinking about that are reinventing themselves. And it isn't just basically, Tesla and SpaceX and something that Peter Thiel has dreamt up. Most of these people actually will not drive the companies of the future because they are all about digital and they forget about carbon, analog human beings.
Yep. No, that's great. I love that so much. It's interesting because I don't know if you remember, but when I was at Crispin, my strategy team came up with the whole strategy for Domino's back in the day. And, it's like our pizzas, it started with our pizzas sucked. And then it went to, the delivery. We were connecting all the digital systems with, you've got 30 minutes reinventing that. So it was a really, really an amazing journey. So. All right. Well, thanks, Rishad. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it. What amazing conversation. Really enjoyed not only the conversation today, but your writing. And we'll make sure we have links for the Great Reinvention and then Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data in the notes below the podcast to make sure we help everybody get acquainted with your work.
Perfect. Thank you, John.
Hopefully soon you'll have 30,000 folks a week reading it instead of your 20.
Perfect. I'm hoping so.
Yeah, great.